So welcome everyone. Happy Friday. It's an absolute joy to be here with you on this very sunny week in the UK to help understand or to dive perhaps further into the concept of motivation and particularly the direct link between motivation and performance. And I'm going to be sharing with you what we know about motivation and a tool that we use at Blue Canoe when we're developing leaders and teams, which is called Motivational Maps. So I'm excited to share that with you. Hopefully you can all see my slides. I'm pretty sure you can, or you may have said so already. Yeah, thanks, Steve. So in terms of what we're going to cover in the next 45 minutes, I'll do a super quick welcome. We'll talk about what is motivation and why does it matter? Because I think it's really important to get grounded in what motivation means to each of you, because I think that word is quite emotive in itself. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what motivational maps are and show you the lens of motivational maps, because I believe it's one of the most powerful motivation metrics out there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what's the link between insights and maps. Insights discovery, as many of you will know, is kind of our secret sauce here at Blue Canoe. We love insights discovery, and we love using insights discovery, which measures preference, at the same time, pretty much if we can, with motivational maps, which measures motivation. We're going to look at what benefits that understanding motivation and using maps brings to teams. And then, as usual, if you've attended any of our webinars before, we always want to have something useful for you to do at the end of the session to consider for your own personal development or personal motivation. So hopefully that's okay. And we've got some extra people joining us. Hi, Sam. Nice to see you. Along the way. So without further ado, I'm going to get started if that's all right. And I'd like to ask you the question, what is motivation? Like if you had to define motivation, what would you say? And you can either come off mute if that's comfortable for you, or if not, just head into the chat and write me a few words about what you believe motivation is, because it's such a, I think it's such a big word. Here we go. So what have we got in here? Sam, actively wanting to do something rather than having to. Yeah, exactly. So a desire, perhaps, rather than a need. So for you, Steve, it's someone's why. Yeah, absolutely could be. It's the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning. Yeah, and it could be about empowering others. Yeah, and I think different things are going to motivate different people. In terms of the actual word motivation, if you look into the Oxford English Dictionary, it goes back to obviously some Latin words, but it brings two words together. The word motive and the word action come together to create motivation. And I quite like that because it is our motive to take action. As someone just said a second ago, it's about why am I getting out of bed today? Like what is it that kind of makes me want to do that? What are my wants and desires? And why does it matter? So keep going for me in the chat in terms of why does motivation matter to you? Why are you here? And why does it matter to your organization? Because that's a really good question. I think many organizations don't pay enough attention to the subject of motivation. We might look at employee engagement, but we can sometimes forget to look specifically at motivation. And thank you to others dropping in their comments. So yeah, motivation could be about self-improvement for you, Stephanie, absolutely. It does increase productivity, or I think what you're saying there, Sam, is motivated people are more likely to be productive, and that's why it matters. Yeah, absolutely. Why else does motivation matter? Why might it matter to you or the business that you work for, the business that you run?
I think it's about retention as well.
Yeah, exactly, Sam. Happy people stay, don't they? And they offer
Yep.
more. They have a little bit of extra effort that they might put in. Unmotivated or demotivated employees are usually not the most productive, and they actually might be active dissenters. So they might not be saying nice things about your business when they're with their friends and family, because that's what matters. Motivated people talk positively, and those who don't have high levels of motivation might find it difficult. And if they're really demotivated, might be actively not showing much positive regard for the company that they work for. Steve, I love that's a lovely direct comment. Yeah, if motivation matters, it's because in a business context, we want to get productivity high. That equals high performance, which ultimately, if we're running a business, equals financial gain. Brilliant. Love it. So it matters for all these reasons, and I've got many reasons to show you later. But a few of the most important things that I want to say about motivation before we get into it is that motivation is invisible. So it's really hard to measure. It's really hard because it's not tangible. You can't kind of grab it. You can't see it necessarily all the time. Sometimes you can really see it when it's particularly high or particularly low, but there's a huge mid-range of people where motivation just may not be obvious. So it's an invisible trait. It's not like a behavior or an attitude that we can see, that we can observe it and give feedback about it. It's also the energy which drives performance. So to Steve's point, if I'm feeling motivated, I am going to give a little more. I am going to feel more productive. That obviously has huge business benefits. And once we know how to engage and lift those energies that drive performance. And it's important to say that without motivation, absolutely nothing happens. So we only do things because they matter to us. We only do things for a reason. And if it doesn't matter, it doesn't get done. Okay. And it's also worth saying, it's not on the slide as well, that motivation definitely changes with age and stage. So for a human, so throughout our lives, we can be more or less motivated by different things as we grow, because there are different times in our lives when certain things are important to us, and later in life they might be less important to us. So motivation doesn't stay the same. It isn't static, whereas a lot of things that we do measure in organizations can be quite static. So it's well worth me saying that. So I wanted to talk about, Sam, it can be really tricky to motivate when the work's really boring. I agree. But once we understand the motivators of the individual, we can even make the most boring work enjoyable and desirable. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a bit. But we've created a really simple performance triangle. So we know that there are three key ingredients that lead to high performance in teams and businesses, and we're already talking about one of them. But we'd start at the top of the triangle with the what. And most businesses place a lot of emphasis here. So this is all about the direction of the business, the vision and the goals, the objectives, the KPIs, the targets, the stuff that we're driven to work towards, the stuff that's measurable, usually in an end of year performance conversation or something like that. It's the stuff that we talk about more regularly in our one-to-ones. Are we on track or off track with stuff? So that's the what. And people need to know the what. We need to have that as a North Star in order to perform. Some organizations over time, certainly over the last 30 years, have also got really, really good at measuring the how. So this is more about the behaviors and some of the skills that are needed to enable the what's. And at Blue Canoe, we might use insights discovery to help us understand the how. So to help us understand people's behaviors, because it's helpful to know, right? My preferences help drive my performance. And if I understand self, I can do more about any gaps or whatever in performance. But unfortunately, what we experience when we're working with our clients is that many organizations stop there and they forget this really important element that Steve almost hit the nail on the head right at the top of the session when he said why. We'd like to add an extra word, which is why bother? So the why can be a bit ethereal for some. Some people aren't necessarily too connected with their why unless they've done a lot of reading around it or they've listened to some Simon Sinek TED Talks or things like that. Not too many people can easily identify their why unless it's super clear or super relevant right now. But the why bother helps us to look at motivation on a daily basis. So why should I bother today? And that's the piece that many organizations fail to look at in a performance triangle. And we believe when all three of those elements are engaged fully, then we can really make a difference to performance in any business. And this is where at Blue Canoe, we would want to use a motivational map to go, right, how can we get under the skin of what it is that motivates people? Because it's tricky. It's not as easy as asking someone what motivates you, because we're going to look back at what you wrote at the beginning of the session in a minute. So motivational maps are a great tool. It's a relatively new tool to market. It hasn't been out there too long, so it doesn't have a big reputation yet. But I think it's gonna mushroom in the same way that insights and strength scope and DISC and some of the other kind of more behavioral models have mushroomed over the last 20 years or so. So motivational maps is newer to the market than all of those tools that I've just mentioned. And this is what one looks like. So this is a front cover from Claire's, who works alongside us. And it measures a lot of things. But crucially, the two things a motivational map looks at are what your motivators are right now and to what extent you feel those motivators are being met. So it's a 2D concept. We don't just get a linear, or what are your motivators? We get an understanding or a measure of how currently motivated an individual is feeling, or a team, if we extend to the team map. So this is the motivational model that sits underneath the motivational map, and it comes from a few different places. So for those of you that are interested, I'd love to tell you more about it. I'll skim across for a little bit now, but it's based off of 3 psychological theories that I'm sure most of you have heard of. So the first thing that it's based from is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I'm pretty sure I don't need to tell this room, knowing who most of you are, about that, because you probably can talk Maslow in your sleep. It's also based off of a profile that is ancient, a really old, perhaps slightly more spiritual profile that some of you may have come across, called the Enneagram. So there's some roots in Enneagram within a motivational map. We can talk more in detail about that another time. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with another tool called Edgar Schein's Career Anchors. So that's about what draws people into certain careers. And he has different career anchors. I could, again, tell you about those another time. But those are the 3 kind of psychological principles that James Sale, the author of Motivational Maps, the owner of the company, has pulled together to create this 9 motivator model. So you can see it's clustered up. It's clustered up into a red achievement cluster, a green relationship cluster, and a blue growth cluster. Now, the red, blue, and green has nothing to do with insights discovery, for those of you that are familiar with the model on the wall behind me. It's just the colors that they chose. But the motivators are clustered in those reasons, in those areas, for reasons. And we have builder, director, and expert in the achievement cluster. We have friend, defender, and star in the relationship sector, and spirit, creator, and searcher in the growth cluster. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bit more detail about each of these. Sorry. Yeah. Were you going to add something or a question?
Yeah.
Go for it. No? We don't have a question.
Okay, that's fine.
Oh, I think Natasha might have accidentally unmuted. Enzo, could you just mute Natasha for me, please? Sorry, everyone. I thought she was talking to me, but I think she's talking to someone else. Thank you, Enzo. I'm going to show you a bit more detail about the 9. And then I want you to look at that list. If you were here at the top of the call when I said, I want you to write a little list of what might motivate you, I want you to notice if you can assign what you wrote to any one of these 9 sectors when I reveal, as I'm doing right now, the kind of the top values of each of the motivators. So they're going to just appear nice and slowly. I want you to have a bit of a read. I'm not going to read them out to you. Notice the list. If you were at the top of the call and you wrote a few things down, notice, do they fit in any of these? Which one might be calling you more? Which one's kind of going, oh, yeah, that one sounds familiar to me, or sounds like something that might wake me up, get me out of bed in the morning. Or there might be a couple here that you kind of go, no, I don't think I would be actively motivated by that one. And then what I'd love you to do, for the people who are familiar with Zoom, and even if you're not, I'd love you to go onto your toolbar, which is either going to be at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on your Zoom setup. And you'll find an annotate function, which is a little pen. So it just looks like a little pen icon. I'd love you to click on that for me. And then it brings up, probably as a sidebar on my slide or on your screen, some different stamps. And there's a tick stamp, there's a arrow stamp, there's a cross stamp, there's a star, etc., etc. I'm sure those of you that are regular Zoom users will know all of this. I'd love for you to drop a few stamps for me, perhaps on, maybe if you could pick 3 motivators from the 9 that you think might be your top 3. And if there's one that you kind of go, oh, I don't like it, maybe if you use the cross stamp to do that. So I'll just wait and see if we can all work out how to use annotate function. Oh, thanks, Sam. It's also in the view options bit. Thank you. It's really hard for me as a presenter to see what you can see. But thank you. That's really helpful. So brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I can see some ticks arriving. So feel free to tick or star up to 3 of them. And if there is one that you think, oh no, I'm not so sure that one's actually for me, maybe put a bit of a cross on it, or Lovely. Okay, I can see all the stamps pouring in. So we've got a few, and feel free to keep stamping it up as you read and react. We've got a few little clusters. So a few of you choosing Defender, that's the stability and security one. Defender wants high loyalty, so they want to feel part of something for extended periods. Expert seems to have a cluster. That's not a surprise in a room full of people who do learning and development or HR for a living. Expert is all about being the master, learning the subject, really specializing, really honing in your skills, being the go-to person. And then there's a little cluster on spirit as well, which is all about freedom and independence and autonomy and kind of going your own way. So we've got a lovely little blend. We've also got a cross by builder. And builder is the money one, okay? But it's interesting that it's not purely money because everyone needs money to exist. But builder is more about above average money, above average status. And someone said, that's not for me. But someone else has said, well, actually, that is for me. And there's no judgment there. This is what's so important about maps is that you will view each of these through your own lens. And that's really interesting to notice, isn't it? Because if builder isn't your thing, you have to ask yourself the internal question, well, what does that make me believe about people that say that builder is their thing? And that's where we get to some really interesting conversations in teams. Because people kind of almost can disagree about motivators. We can't be motivated by that. Why do you work here if you're motivated by that? But actually, motivation is deeply rooted in who we are as individuals. Okay. So we've got some creator, some searcher. Amy's saying no thank you to director. No thanks. I don't want to have power and control over people or resources. And Star, the recognition one's got a lovely little tick next to it too. Friend, about being with people I like, having meaningful relationships at work is super important to some. So I'm giving you a flavor of the 9 motivators, and it's really interesting, isn't it, that you can have a really brilliant conversation just from this slide. If we were an intact team, like, wouldn't this be a really rich conversation about, well, what's drawing people? And we haven't even looked into the profile yet. We're still at the stage of understanding what each of the motivators might mean. Okay. And I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I could literally spend about 3 hours telling you all about them. But I'm keen for you to see how they work going forwards. So I'm going to share with you, I need to clear the animations first. How do I do that? Enzo, I think you might need to do it for me. Could you go into annotations and just clear them for me? Because otherwise they'll appear on the next slide when I use it. Thank you. I think you just need to clear annotations and then they'll all disappear. Got it? Thank you. Okay, so when you get a motivational map, one of the first things that it does is it tells you about your clusters. So remember, relationship, achievement, growth, the different colors, buckets. This is the detail from my motivational map because it would be absolutely wrong of me to share anybody else's with you. So you're getting a little glimpse into Elaine's world right now. As you can see, growth is super important to me. So that's the spirit, the searcher, and the creator motivator are highest or quite near the top in my profile. That's unsurprising to me because I know myself pretty well. It's also unsurprising for my job that kind of those more growth focused, future focused motivators are important to me. Relationship is of secondary importance, and achievement actually isn't that important to me at all in terms of those 3 motivators. So everybody will get a cluster analysis. It matters not whether there's a huge dependence one way or whether they're all quite equal. It's just interesting to notice that, and interesting to notice how these motivators play together, which we'll talk about in a bit as well, because sometimes motivators can really complement and lift each other up, and other times they don't really play nicely together. So we're going to have a look at that. The next thing that your motivational map would show you, and again, this is my data, so forgive me for sharing my personal stuff, but it shows you your ranking order from left to right of your motivators. And you can see that for me, searcher is super high. Now, anything above this dotted line across the top here, we consider a real peak of a motivator. So anything above or near that line is of super importance to the person whose profile it is. Searcher is the motivator about making a difference to other people, making a difference in the world. And for me, just with my life experience and the work that I do, I can never make enough difference. So my bucket, but I'm going to talk about buckets a little bit today. My bucket for Searcher is actually really big, and it would take quite a lot for me to fill it. It's almost like an insatiable motivator for me. No matter how much difference I make, I will always want to make more, almost as if my bucket has a few holes in it, and I can keep pouring it in, but it keeps coming out the bottom. So I keep having to find ways to feed my Searcher so that I stay motivated. And that's really helpful in the line of work that I have. Um, you can then see the order. And sometimes, like mine, a motivational map might have a few steps down. So it might be quite steppy. It's like, oh, so Searchers of super importance to Elaine. Then she's got another little cluster of friends. So relationship is also important to me. It's why I'm like, oh, Sam, I know you. Hi. Because I've had a relationship with Sam before. It kind of, your motivators, although they're not behaviors, they are obvious when people know you. Because to me, I'm like, oh, yes, I'm really motivated. I've got a friend on the call. There's some people I recognize from last week. But my friend, spirit, and creator are all clustered up in the sort of mid-20s. And then my scores take a bit of a tumble and they're all kind of clustered up at the bottom. So you can see all those red motivators, the director, need for power and control. It's not really my thing. I also don't need to be known as the expert or have particular mastery over stuff. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy it, but it's not what gets me out of bed in the morning. And my builder one, money, it's not that important to me. I have enough of what I need. Okay. And then defender and star also quite low. So defender stability, I work for myself. I have no stability in my life and I love it, but that wouldn't work for everybody. Okay. And star, the kind of recognition, celebrity spotlight, look at me, look at me. I also don't feel I need much of that, partly because I get a lot of it anyway. And remember earlier I said about Maslow, and you probably are all familiar with Maslow as a pyramid, but actually Maslow never drew the pyramid. There's no evidence from Maslow's work that he created a pyramid. People have kind of put that onto his work afterwards. But if we kind of just stick with that pyramid image for a bit, because everyone knows that kind of Wi-Fi is the bottom layer in Maslow's pyramid, but it's all about security and kind of being safe and having food and shelter at the bottom of Maslow. And then we're kind of leading up to self-actualization and that really cool stuff about being our best self and being the person we want to be in the world. I want you to imagine Maslow for a moment and just kind of twist this bar chart onto its side where the smallest bars are at the bottom and the biggest bars are at the top, because at some point in every single motivational map we use a bit of Maslow, and we can remember that in Maslow we have needs and wants. So we need security, we might want self-actualization, but we don't need it on a daily basis. And in a motivational map there will be a tipping point at some point for everybody where your needs, so what you actually need in order to perform, turn into wants or desires. And someone mentioned that right at the top of the call when I said, what is motivation? Well, it's a desire. It's something that I want, even if I don't have it. And if you turn mine to the side, the reason defender, builder, and star are low in my profile is because I have enough of them. My buckets there, I'll go back to buckets, are quite small and they're already topped up. So I don't need any more of that. It's a met need for me. At some point, though, they're going to turn into wants, and at some point, they're going to turn into desires. And for me, that's where the buckets get bigger and bigger and bigger. So you need to pour more into them as the scores go up towards the left-hand side. Does that make sense? I can see some people nodding and getting along with it, but I'm just aware I'm talking at you. It's not my preference. My friend motivator wants you to join it. So that's one of the key pages in a motivational map, the order of motivators, the intensity of motivators, the high ones that we need to pay attention to because the buckets there are quite big. And you'll notice there's another colored dot at the number 10. Any motivators that appear below the number 10 are what we call an inverse spike. So something that is of such little importance that it will be relevant for the person, because even the lowest motivators can be not met. And that's interesting when we have a profile where low motivators are not met. Take me back to that later if we have time. But you'll remember I also said earlier that some motivators don't play nicely together. So a little bit like oil and vinegar, some motivators can kind of exist, but they just don't want to get together on first glance. However, like any good salad dressing, we can give them a good mix and actually some magic happens and they taste quite nice. So here are the list of the 8 motivator pairings where it's a bit oil and vinegar here. Like, what's going on? So I know I've said very little, but I'm curious to notice your reaction to that, and I'd love for you to get involved. So, um, why do you think, if you feel you know a little bit about the motivators already, why do you think some of these might clash? And yeah, just give me your reaction to these 8 pairings. Oh, thanks, Lauren. And thanks, Steve, for putting in the chat about your creator searcher growth. Yep, love it. Lauren saying defender, friend, searcher. What a lovely combo. That's that makes me feel good. Tell me about these ones that don't play nicely together. I'd pop it in the chat or come off mute if you're having a reaction and you'd love to share it. Maybe you've got an extroverted preference like me and you'd like to talk. What do
I
you
don't
think
mind
about some
coming
of these?
off mute and
Oh, go on, Sam.
talking.
Talk to me.
So there's some that I think, oh yeah, that makes sense. So like the
Mm.
director friend, it almost
Hmm.
feels like
Yeah,
the controlling
yeah,
aspect could overpower that kind of mutual friendship aspect.
yeah,
Um, but then others like friend and spirit made me think, oh, that's interesting.
yeah.
Because that almost puts the friend into that controller mode because the spirit is like, I need to be free.
Yeah,
So
it could do. That's an interesting perception. Yeah, it could do that, and it's really interesting that you call on that one, because the reason why we need to know this is that if we have them in our own motivator set and they are close together, then we call that an internal opposition. So something that inside of us might be having a bit of a fight with itself. And if I just take it back to my own list of motivators, you'll notice, Sam, that my friend is second and my spirit is third. So I have internal opposition in my profile, which means that for me, the question I need to ask myself is, Elaine, it's really important to you that you want to have friendships in the workplace. It's also really important that you want to be free and you want to be your own boss. You want to have autonomy. You want to be free from bureaucracy. How can you hold those two things in equal measure given the scores are 27 and 25? And this is where you can create some great outputs from a coaching conversation with a person who has a motivational map in front of you. The answer for me is obvious, because because I've created a business where I get to work with people who are my friends. I do develop meaningful relationships at work. That's one of our key strengths here at Blue Canoe. We know our clients really well. We love all of them. Um, but we do that through our spirit, through being this, like, do you know what, we're our own entity. We don't have to follow any rules. We've make this, we can make up our own playbook as we go, and we really value that here. It's part of our value of joy and abundance. It's quite freeing. We love making the world a better place to live in. So you can see how that works for me and it works in my business. But the other thing about these motivator pairings that I want to say, and I wouldn't normally say this in such a short call, because we're still at very much like intro stage, but I feel like you guys have got it. These motivator pairings also create something that we call polarity reinforcement. So if you have these motivators at opposing ends of your motivational profile, one may reinforce the other. So for instance, let's use the first one on the slide here, director and friend. If I had director really, really high, that need for power and control to be in charge of things and resources and people, and that was my top motivator. And if I had friend as really, really low, you can see how the two might support each other, because friend is all about meaningful relationships, having, creating meaning and depth of relationship at work. Directors like, I want to be clear about what we're here to do. So the two can actually lift each other up. So my low friend can actually reinforce my high director. And we might find that the poles between them increase over time because they fulfill each other in a opposite magnet kind of way. Does that make sense? So sort of they can polarity reinforce each other. Ooh. We don't normally get to that in an intro session, but hey, we're all here. It's Friday morning. Why not? So I'm just checking in the chat. What else is going on? So Lauren, builder searcher makes sense as conflict practice where one is more internal facing and the other's more external facing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, builder is the money one, and searcher is to make a difference. And again, how can you hold the two of those equally? People do. We just need to understand them. We just need to coach them. There is no right or wrong with any of these. We just know that it's a really interesting conversation when there's internal opposition or polarity reinforcement. Okay. So, anyway, There we are. I've got more to tell you though, so I must stick to time. The other thing that you get, I mentioned it earlier, your motivational map is 2D. So it not only measures what motivates you, but it measures how you are currently feeling motivated. And it gives you a score in the motivational profile for how you're currently motivated. And again, this will change. Any simple change in an organization can affect motivation. A change in line management can affect motivation, a change in organizational structure or role, or something going on in your personal life can really impact your motivators. So again, this is from my profile. When I did this last profile, I was 90% motivated. So that means I was, I'm in the kind of optimal zone. I'm happy and enjoying my work and coming to work. And I hope that that shows. But it's really interesting for us to look at teams and to notice, where is everybody? How is everybody showing up at work at the moment? And where are the zones that we need to be observant about? Where do we need to pay attention? Because some simple changes in teams or workplaces can make a massive difference to motivation. But if we don't measure it, we'll never know. Because remember, motivation is invisible. Can't see it. Um, so you get a motivational measure as well. And I thought there was another bar chart coming, but there isn't. So it would be remiss of me not to talk about insights alongside maps, because I sort of think they're like siblings that get on well together. Two completely separate models written by completely separate organizations, but they work really beautifully together. So as we know, or many of you will know, insights discovery measures and talks about behavior really well, really accurately. Majority of people really enjoy insights as a process, either as an individual or a team. But what insights doesn't do, if I'm going to be picky about insights, it doesn't really describe the why. And we know that's super important in our performance triangle. There is a motivation page in your insights profile, but it's kind of a bit, it's not good enough. It's a lovely list of what could motivate, but in my experience of working with insights for more than 20 years, it's never really woken people up to, oh, and therefore I can unlock the puzzle of my own motivation, which is why we started looking at a different tool for motivation, because we recognized there was a bit of a gap. What Maps does is it really helps us understand what we need at work. And that's a simple question. What do you need at work? What's got to be true for performance to even be accessible for you in the workplace? And I'm not talking about your PC, your phone, or your technical gear. Like what behaviors, what reasons, how can we engage with a needs basis? And then most importantly, how do we then get to wants and desires? Because that's where true performance starts kicking in. I've mentioned it a couple of times. The map is 2D, so we don't just get the what motivates you, we get how you're currently motivated. So just like a real map, it's got contour lines on it. We can see kind of how people are currently feeling. It's so powerful. And what Insights does is shows a team's different preferences. But what it doesn't show, so we might have a team wheel, for instance, on Insights that shows where all people are plotted. But what we can't see is whether they're closely motivated or not. And that's important for us to understand. I was working with a team last week. Majority of them were motivated by Searcher and kind of, spirit. Yeah, let's make a difference and let's be free. One individual in their team was motivated by Defender and Builder. And he felt really out of place because he simply couldn't access those motivators from his peers, because motivation isn't just a management strategy, it's a peer strategy too. He couldn't access those things in his own team. So it enabled a really beautiful conversation about, well, how can he step into things that he needs to get so that he can work alongside these other motivators and they're still getting what they need to get. So it's not about changing anything, it's about understanding how to access your motivators. And we think that maps and insights complement each other beautifully. And it's unlikely, if you worked with us, that we'd do one without the other. We very much like to do both. Someone asked me yesterday, though, would you do both in one day? And I was like, that might be a bit of theory overload for a group of people. That I might just blow their brains. So probably not, because I like to do insights and maps kind of, I like to land them both really well. So anyway, there we go. Benefits. I said I would talk about benefits at the top of the show, so to speak. There's loads of benefits, and James Sales' book, which I'm going to show you at the end, actually, for those of you that have a reading and theoretical preference in terms of learning, we've got a special offer on his book if you want to buy it. But it's really, really helpful from a technical perspective to understand exactly how he wrote the motivational map, and some of these benefits because he's studied it, and it's so helpful. So these are not my stats, these are James's stats, but on the organizations that James has worked with, they have measured 10% higher customer ratings, 21% greater profitability, 30% higher productivity, and 41% less absenteeism. Now, there's loads more data in the book about that because a lot of people want to understand the basis of these stats. I do too. Isn't that interesting? Like, what organization would say no to these things? I want those in my business. I want everyone to be more productive, less absent, and for there to be big profits, because then we all win. You know, that abundance mindset that I have. A rising tide lifts all the ships. There's loads more as well. So I'm not going to read these to you, but we know that looking at motivation has a really positive impact on everyone who decides to spend time investing in, well, what is it? What is this magic ingredient that creates motivation? And we know that it's sticky. People can talk about, oh, my motivator in star just is, I'm just not getting enough visibility. I'm just not getting enough recognition at the moment. We can talk about that then. We make the invisible visible in the workplace, and that can make a massive, massive difference. And I wanted to show you again, because I know I've got a room of HR and learning people. This looks like a big hot mess. I promise you it's not. This is an anonymized team map. So this is the data for my team. So this is all the people that work at Blue Canoe. And you can see that what it gives us, and I've obviously taken everyone's names and everyone's motivation scores off because that would be a breach of their privacy. But it gives you our organization for our business, our order of motivators. The red one, you can see the code represents everyone's top motivator. The orange boxes represent everyone's second motivator. The yellow boxes represent third motivators, and the blue boxes show the lowest motivators. Now, this is interesting for us to have a discussion because we can start to see where we are closely motivated and where actually we might be leaving someone behind without really realizing that we need to fill their bucket of motivation as well. So this person down here, you know, someone's got a really low score in expert. If we paid too much attention to expert, that might be really detrimental to the person who's saying, do you know what, I don't value that one. I don't need that one. And likewise, it would be easy for me with my high searcher and as the leader of my team to really over focus on searcher. So you can tell those are my scores at the beginning. I've got the highest score in searcher in my team. So it'd be really easy for me to think, well, they all want searcher like I do, right? And I will lead through my own self. I will lead through my own motivators. But look what I'd be missing if I led everyone through searcher. I'd be missing these other people who have really high motivators in friend. My two colleagues, I know exactly who they are, who have a high expert. My conversations with them are very different because I understand what motivates them. And it's really interesting to put this into a room and have a really good conversation about how can we all get what we need? How can we all get our buckets, whether small or large, as full as they can be, because we know those benefits that come from higher levels of motivation in organizations and for individuals as well. You know, we're, without being too cheesy, we love to make the world a better place. And I genuinely think that starts with an individual. That starts with each human kind of being okay, and understanding this can really help contribute to that. It kind of, those light bulb moments go up and go, oh, of course I'm not in a great place at the moment. I'm not getting access to, and they can tell us what's going on. So we're getting to the end, and I'm not going to run over today because I normally do. The things I want you to remember is that motivation is really individual and it changes over time. So what motivated me yesterday might be different in a week's time, depending, or a year's time. And that's okay. We just need to keep an eye on it. If you ask people about their motivators, and I did this on purpose at the beginning of the session, I asked you to do this. I'm curious, did you write a bit of a shopping list? Did you just write loads of things down? Because usually that's what happens in a motivation conversation. If people don't know, if they've not spent some time looking at it, people tend to go, oh, well, I want this and I want a bit of that and I want this. And especially if that's a line management conversation, the money one is always overplayed because we know that you're in charge of our salary and our bonus and our everything else. So it can be a bit inaccurate to just ask people what motivates them, because not everyone can pull the invisible forward for themselves. I said I wanted to give you some things that were useful for you at the end. So I want you to have a little think about, you know, how could you use this? Maps will help you if it's an area of interest to you to make it clearer for your business what people must have at work. And like Maslow, there is a line. There is that we must have this or it's just not possible. Maps will help you understand where that line is for your people. I would love for you to encourage yourself and others to just reflect on this and explore your own motivators a little bit. I've thrown a load of data at you in a very quick fire way. But have a think about it. When do you do your best work? When do you show up as the best version of you? What are the conditions that are created for you to be the most amazing version of yourself? And the clues to your motivators will be there. And be curious about others. So it's really easy. It's a pitfall that I fall into regularly, even though I know all about motivational maps. But be curious about others and try not to lead through just because it's important to you doesn't mean it's going to be important to the people that you lead. And a good question you could ask people if you do have an open and psychologically safe relationship with your team or your people is why does it matter to them that those things get done first? Because it will be an order. It will be, I've got to get my needs met first in order to access those wants and desires that are coming a bit later. Okay, so I mentioned some resources. And I've certainly mentioned James Sale. He's the kind of genius guy that created this. His book, Mapping Motivation, retails online. You go to your Amazon or wherever you normally go to buy books. I'd prefer you went to your local bookshop, but Amazon's probably the place where most people go. We have this in stock. If you wanted to buy it from us, just let us know. And the other book I would recommend that is my second favorite read about motivation is Kate Turner's book, Create Motivation. Again, we work with Kate regularly. She's my mentor. She's my motivation mentor. So we again have copies of Kate's book in stock. So if either of those resources are of interest to you, just let us know. I think, yeah, we've put a little deal here. So if you want to buy both together, we can parcel them up and send them to you for a bit cheaper. So let us know. The email address at the bottom there is Enzo's email. He's sitting over there. Give him a little wave. And then we thought as well, we do a bit of a post-show offer because we know that many of you we met at the Festival of Work for the first time. So thank you for coming to our stand and meeting us. It's really great to have you here. If you want to get your hands on a copy of your own motivational map and have a debrief session with one of us, then we're doing a show only, webinar only offer. Here it is for you. You can grab a hold of that. Usually we sell to clients that kind of session at about 480 quid plus VAT. So it's a good price. And if you want to let Enzo know if you're interested, we'd love to see you because we love sharing the word about motivational maps. So my friends, that's well, I'm nearly there. If you're thinking about this from an organizational perspective, because many of you are learning professionals, so I didn't want to leave it without telling you what it might cost you if you want to be a mapper, if you want to do maps for your organization. The profiles retail at 85 quid a head. For us to do your session, to do your feedback, we charge 395 per session. That's where the 480 comes from. Give us a call if you want us to come and run motivational maps in your organization, because we'd be delighted to do that. We have a variety of prices based on the experience levels of our practitioners. But if your organization wants to buy more than 10 profiles, we have economies of scale available. So if you had like 700 people in your business, we wouldn't be charging you 85 quid a head. We'd work with you to kind of find a price point that met your budget and gave us what we need. And if you are already a skilled learning and development professional who's used to delivering learning sessions in and for your business, we have a professional accreditation route available for you. So we just finished a MAPS accreditation here at Blue Canoe headquarters on Wednesday. So we've just released another 6 mappers into the world to go and use maps within their organization. And the prices tumble for that too. So it's much, much cheaper if you want to do it within your own business. So do give us a call, drop Enzo or myself a line in the first instance if exploring maps further is something of interest to you. And that, my friends, is that. Hopefully we'll see some of you next Friday. I'm not running the next webinar. It'll be my colleagues and perfectly brilliant partners, Nicola Blackmore and Steve Brunt, next week, talking to you about how we use some tips, tools and techniques on our leadership programs to develop leaders. So if you're interested in that one, the QR code's on the screen right now. Feel free to sign up if you haven't already. And then that, my friends, is that. Been lovely to see you and spend Friday morning with some of you again. Thanks for joining me again. Hopefully we'll see you next week, and have a lovely, lovely weekend when it comes. So, and I'll be here if you've got questions about other stuff too. So do stay behind. If you have a quick question, I can see Steve asking a question in the chat, so I'll answer it. Thanks, guys. Lovely to see you. Take care.